You've probably heard Apple's working hard to move manufacturing away from China. But here's what nobody's talking about. Apple's about to use more Chinese-made memory chips inside iPhones than ever before. And I'm not talking about assembly. I'm talking about the actual memory chips that power your phone. According to reports, through 2027, Apple's planning at least 5 brand new iPhone models. And they're seriously considering memory chips made by Chinese manufacturers like CXMT and YMTC. This isn't a backup plan when supplies run short. This is becoming a core strategy for the world's most valuable technology company. So why would Apple suddenly trust Chinese chipmakers with something this critical? It all comes down to one problem the entire industry just couldn't solve: a memory shortage that's lasted longer than anyone predicted. Samsung and SK Hynix, the traditional memory suppliers, simply can't make chips fast enough. Their factories are at capacity. Their prices are climbing. Meanwhile, Chinese memory manufacturers have spent years building new factories and proving their quality. For Apple, that means access to cheaper chips without waiting in line for years. But here's where it gets really interesting. This move doesn't happen alone. It's tied up with Apple's push into foldable phones. The quiet war between the United States and China over chip technology, and a supply squeeze that's reshaping the entire industry. Understand why Apple's making this move now. You need to know what happened to the memory market over the last 3 years. Memory chips are like the short-term brain of your phone. They're called RAM, and your iPhone needs plenty of it to run multiple apps, AI features, and new on-device processing without slowing down. Picture it like this. Imagine a restaurant that usually handles 100 customers, but suddenly got packed with 200. They can't hire fast enough. They can't expand fast enough, and every customer ends up waiting longer for their meal. That's exactly what happened in the memory market. When artificial intelligence exploded, every company, from cloud providers to car makers to smartphone manufacturers, suddenly needed way more memory chips. The 3 traditional manufacturers, Samsung, Micron, and SK Hynix, ramped up production as fast as they could. But factories take years to build and billions of dollars to construct. They couldn't move fast enough. Apple, being the world's biggest phone maker with hundreds of millions of customers, felt this squeeze harder than most. They couldn't just wait it out. At the same time, China's memory manufacturers have quietly built enormous new factories. CXMT and YMTC have invested hundreds of billions of yuan into making competitive memory chips. For Apple, the math suddenly makes sense. Chinese chips are available now, they are cheaper, and their quality has improved dramatically in just the last 2 years. This is the pressure point that's forcing Apple's hand. Let's talk about what CXMT and YMTC actually are and why Apple would trust them. CXMT stands for Changjiang Memory Technologies. YMTC stands for Yangtze Memory Technologies. Both are Chinese state-backed memory manufacturers created specifically to break Samsung and SK Hynix's dominance. Think of them as new challengers who spent 15 years learning how to make the highest complexity chips in the world, and they actually pulled it off. For decades, making memory chips was considered a black art. The tolerances are insanely tight. You're etching patterns smaller than a virus onto silicon. One tiny defect and the whole wafer is worthless. Samsung and SK Hynix had the recipes, the experience, and the factories locked down. But around 2020, China decided to invest massively. YMTC broke through and started making 3D NAND flash memory that's genuinely competitive. CXMT followed with DRAM memory, the type that powers a phone's day-to-day performance. The key thing is this: their yields have improved from rough in 2022 to pretty solid in 2025 and 2026. Yields mean the percentage of chips that actually work after manufacturing. When your yield is 70%, you throw away 30%. That's wasteful and expensive. CXMT and YMTC have gotten yields up high enough that Apple, a company obsessed with quality control, would even consider them. Their memory isn't faster than Samsung's, but it's fast enough, and it's much cheaper. For Apple, that equation works. So what does this actually mean for the new iPhones Apple's building? According to the reports, we're looking at 5 new models coming between now and 2027. That sounds like a lot, but Apple always does this. They're likely new versions of the iPhone 17, 18, and 19, plus different screen sizes and maybe a foldable. The foldable is the interesting one. when Apple finally ships a foldable phone. It needs more memory than a regular iPhone because it's basically two screens in one and needs to run everything at once. That's where Chinese chips become especially valuable to Apple. Imagine you're building a foldable iPhone. You've got the hinge, you've got the complex software, you've got the screen engineering. The last thing you want is to wait 2 years for memory chips. If CXMT can deliver gigabytes of DRAM by next year at a 20% discount, suddenly your timeline works and your cost structure becomes viable. We don't know which specific iPhones will use Chinese memory and which will keep Samsung or SK Hynix. Apple keeps that secret, but the fact that they are planning around this, that they are designing 5 models with Chinese chips in the equation, that's the real story. The other models will be incremental, better cameras, faster processors, improved battery life, but they all need memory. And if some of that memory comes from China at lower cost and faster delivery, Apple's margins improve and their supply chain risks go down. Here's the key question: how do Chinese memory chips actually stack up against what Samsung and SK Hynix make? Let's be honest about it. On pure speed, Samsung still wins slightly. Their memory is microscopically faster, but we are talking about differences measured in billionths of a second. In real-world usage, you can't feel the difference. It's like comparing 2 sports cars. One does 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, the other in 3.6 seconds. Regular people can't tell the difference. Where Chinese chips win decisively is price and availability. CXMT and YMTC can sell memory at 15 to 25% cheaper than Samsung or SK Hynix. At Apple's scale, that's billions of dollars in annual savings, and they can deliver volume without the long wait times. Samsung's booked out, SK Hynix is booked out, but CXMT has spare capacity. That's huge. The risk factor is what people always worry about: reliability, longevity, and whether the quality remains consistent over millions of units. Samsung and SK Hynix have proven track records spanning decades. CXMT and YMTC have only proved themselves for a few years at scale. But here's the thing: if Apple tests a batch and finds them reliable, that becomes the new gold standard. When the world's largest phone maker ships your chips in hundreds of millions of phones, your reputation either builds or collapses very publicly. For CXMT and YMTC, this is everything. They won't cut corners because one failure would destroy their credibility forever. This change has massive implications, and they ripple far beyond iPhones. First, let's talk geopolitics. The United States has spent years trying to restrict Chinese access to advanced chip-making technology, but memory isn't the same as processors. Processors like the ones that power AI are harder to make and more controlled. Memory is more standardized. It's still complex, but CXMT and YMTC have cracked it. The moment Apple starts shipping phones with Chinese memory, it signals that containment has failed. China's not catching up in some future decade. They're already competitive today. This puts massive pressure on Samsung and SK Hynix. They've counted on Apple as a loyal customer. Now Apple's shopping around. Their market share could shrink. Their profit margins will face downward pressure. Samsung and SK Hynix will have to cut prices or improve technology faster to win back business. That's actually good for innovation. Competition forces everyone to get better faster. Taiwan and South Korea have relied on their dominance in chips as a form of geopolitical leverage. If China can make memory competitively, that leverage weakens. The United States might respond with more export controls, but those typically take time to implement and trigger retaliation. What we are watching is a fundamental change in how the chip industry organizes itself: less centralized, more distributed, and Chinese players are no longer on the margins. This is where things get complicated because memory chips power everything from phones to data centers to AI accelerators. So here's what this actually means for you as a potential iPhone buyer. Should you care? Should you wait? Here's the straight answer: this doesn't change your buying decision in the next 12 months. The iPhones shipping this year and next are already designed with their memory strategy locked in. Whether they use Samsung, SK Hynix, or Chinese memory, you won't feel a difference in performance. Your phone will run just as fast. Your apps will load just as quick. The changes are invisible to you, but long-term, this change means something important. It probably means cheaper iPhones. If Apple's manufacturing costs drop because Chinese memory is cheaper, some of that savings eventually flows to consumers. You might see the base iPhone 17 start at a lower price than you'd expect, or you might get more storage and memory at the current price point. That's the real benefit, and it means more reliable supply. Right now, memory shortages have been preventing some iPhone configurations from existing. Broader sourcing options means Apple can offer every model in every configuration without artificial scarcity. One thing to watch: quality and longevity. Keep an eye on iFixit teardowns and user reports when these phones ship. If Chinese-made memory turns out to have longevity issues, that's a problem Apple will have to fix. But if it works flawlessly in hundreds of millions of phones, then the industry narrative about Chinese chipmakers changes permanently. Let's zoom out and see what this whole story means. Apple's decision to plan around Chinese memory chips isn't about one company trusting one supplier. It's a signal that the entire chip industry is reshaping. For decades, the United States and its allies controlled advanced chip production. Japan made memory, South Korea made memory, Taiwan made processors. China was locked out, but that era is ending. China built its own memory manufacturers, invested hundreds of billions of dollars, and actually succeeded. Now the world's largest phone maker is saying, yes, we'll use your chips. This matters for three big reasons. First, it accelerates competition. Samsung and SK Hynix can't rest on their reputation anymore. Second, it means geopolitical leverage changes. When one country controls a critical technology, it has power. Now that power is distributed. Third, it shows that manufacturing is moving toward a more multipolar world. You're not going to see everything made in China, but you're also not going to see everything made in Taiwan or South Korea. The future is diversified, and diversification means resilience. Here's what to watch going forward. When the iPhone 17 and beyond ship with Chinese memory, pay attention to the quality and reliability reports. If they are rock solid, this trend accelerates. If there are issues, Apple might slow down its China push.